Donc bonjour à tous.
So hello everyone. Welcome to this EnerGaïa conference on renewable hydrogen, the keys to lowering costs. I'm Aude Richard. I'm a specialist in energy journalism, and we're going to spend an hour together. So as a reminder, you've got to wear your headset if you want to hear anything. So we're going to talk about hydrogen this afternoon because hydrogen is essential to achieving our climate goals. But as long as its cost remains too high, the industry will not be able to scale up. So the real question is, how can we make renewable energy competitive and do so quickly? Between technological advances, new infrastructure, increasing volumes, and the emergence of resources such as natural hydrogen, there are many levers, but we still need to know which ones are ready, which needs to be supported, and when they will be truly competitive. So to speak about this, we've got 4 guests, and we have 3 stages. First, we'll look at the accelerating industry that doesn't, unfortunately, have the expected volumes. The second part are the technological, energy, and industrial levers to accelerate development. And finally, how to structure a sustainable and competitive economic model in Europe. Your questions will be answered by 4 guests, but prior to that, I just wanted to say that you have a QR code for the Slido application so that you can ask your questions by writing them. You can zoom in on the QR code. You can do it from the back of the room. It works. Then you can go to the application, or you can download the application SLIDO, Slido. So in between the 3 different parts, we'll take questions, but it might be more interactive as we go on. Don't hesitate. And at the end of the conference, we'll have another additional time for Q&A, maybe more low-tech. We can just raise your hand. So before starting, I want to have a little survey. Who are you? Are you local authorities? Just raise your hand. Local authorities? Okay. Design offices?
Des entreprises du secteur de l'hydrogène.
Companies in the hydrogen sector?
Vous êtes les plus nombreux, normal.
It's obvious. Most of you present are here. Are there students or associations? Okay.
Et autres?
Anything else?
J'ai pas tout listé.
Okay, so I didn't make it an exhaustive list, so sorry about that. So thank you very much for being here. So today, the sector is accelerating, but not enough. The objective for 2030 is 4.5 gigawatts, and we're still far from that. There are 150 projects that have already been approved, but we've got a lot left to do to reach the 4.4 gigawatts in 2030. The issue is the price. The Court of Auditors estimates the kilo renewable hydrogen about between 12 euros per kilo, whereas gray hydrogen from fossil fuels is between 1.5 to 2.5 euros per kilo. So you see that there's a huge limitation. In this first stage of the conference, we'll talk about the cost of productions being so high and why. So I'd welcome Christelle Martinez, who is head of development for Southern France at Hynamics, which is a subsidiary of EDF for hydrogen development. So can you give us the sector? Can you remind us in which sectors hydrogen creates value? Hello, I'm Christelle Martinez. I'm very pleased to be here. Just to speak quickly about hydrogen, what are the major markets and sectors that will allow us to decarbonate different areas? 3 large sectors: mobility. Today, with hydrogen solutions, how can we remove CO2, remove cars from the road, assist in mobility with a combustible batteries in trucks, buses, etc., etc. So in the domain of mobility, sector of mobility, we've got the smallest projects in terms of power from 1 5, 8, 10 megawatts maximum, because we have different types of uses, and there's not a huge amount of hydrogen kilos in a truck in any ways. The second market for hydrogen is the industrial sector. In this sector, there are many uses for gray hydrogen, and here the challenge is how to replace this gray hydrogen with low carbon or renewable hydrogen. So these projects are much larger, 50, 100, 150 megawatts. And there's a real challenge for the industries in our area today. And the third largest sector is e-fuels. So this is not just hydrogen. It's how hydrogen participates in the production of e-fuel. We've got CO2, hydrogen. We mix it all together with a chemical formula to create synthetic fuel. And we create fuels for aviation or shipping, maritime, or decarbonize, remove the CO2 from 80% of flights, for example. And this is much more powerful, 200, 300, 400, 500 megawatts, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the largest market segments in the hydrogen world. So depending on the quantity, then the prices will be different because the production costs will be different. So at Hynamics, you are more specialized in industrial projects. What's the limitation there? Why are the manufacturing costs so high? There's different elements. First, we started with mobility. We work with the EDF. We've existed for 6 years now, and we started working within the sector of mobility to assist areas, territories to decarbonate. Can you all hear us okay? Just one person who can't hear. So these are small projects, Auxerre, Belfort, and Cannes, using also in Parisian region and Dunkirk, using them in buses, in garbage hauls. And these small-scale projects allowed us, these first projects, I won't say small projects, allow us to increase our expertise and our skills in the world of hydrogen. It's a new sector, it's a new activity, it's a new technology. Electrolyzers 20 years ago were such a great challenge. So the production costs for the kilo of hydrogen was high because they're low in power. And thanks to this, we were able to go find new projects. That's our development strategy, was to develop low carbon and renewable hydrogen in the industry and fuel worlds, where we're talking about 50, 80, 200 megawatts. Those are our projects we're working with today. We have 2 large projects, industrial projects in France, in fertilizers with chemicals. And then we've got refineries. And then in Nantes, we've got Teca, which is e-fuel for aviation. And today the limitations are why the costs are still so high. When you have a very project-minded vision, well, today, the first thing you have to know is that this is a new technology. We're not really mature yet. We've still got testing to do to ensure that the first time we used electrolysis, it wasn't spontaneous, and it didn't just work. We had to study it. We had to have a lot of means, a lot of R&D. So today, the scalability of it, the larger projects we are, the lower the costs will be. As concerns technologies, and we'll speak about this later, but tomorrow there will be technologies that will allow us to have a yield that's much more important than what we have today. So there's a lot of effort to be made in terms of technology. There's also everything that's exploitation and maintenance. We're going to be able to optimize those costs, but it's important to note, for the moment, technology in this sector being young, we need financial assistance, and without these subsidies, no matter our efforts, we won't be successful. So it's been said right from the start, thank you for this presentation as concerns industrial hydrogen. So I'd call Guirec Dufour, who is the managing director at France at CARE, who's an electricity producer. You are leading a renewable hydrogen production project in Occitanie called HYDOC, which will be the largest French green hydrogen plant in terms of power, 20 megawatts. You are not mistaken. And you're also going to commission a renewable hydrogen station in Béziers and in Narbonne. So you're working on mobility as well as production. Yes, the production for mobility and not just industry, because our production, if you look at the sizes that you have here at Unamix, we're just kind of in the middle. And the approach is right. You've got to, build first a 100 megawatt power station. Some people maybe do that, but it's a huge challenge. And we prefer to start more modestly. We've been authorized for 45 during the 21st. We did the first hydrogen builds last Thursday. We're really pleased with that. These hydrogen bubbles, and we drank them. And we'll be making a second one. So we've got to create an entire ecosystem in the industry, for industry or mobility. So we've got to have infrastructure. If it doesn't exist, then people won't move over to hydrogen. And if no one's using it, and if you can't use it, you can't have infrastructure. So it's we've got to, at some point, industrials such as ourselves, we've got to take risks, to be very clear, to be able to create these infrastructures that will then allow us to have a use for hydrogen. So today, how much does it cost at the pump? That's a secret. We can't say that.
Non. Alors, tout à l'heure, vous avez évoqué entre 7 et 12.
So today we started at 7 to 12. We're not at 12. We're closer to 5. So we can say 7. But yes, the price of hydrogen, there are two things. There are fixed costs, which is about 40%, and then there's electricity. That being said, 40% of fixed costs, 40% of electricity. I've got two levers, which is the price of electricity, and we're going to speak about that with Jean-Vier. And the other lever is volume, in order to, lower the fixed costs. That's in a station, at a service station, which is about more 50-50. It's 85% of fixed costs when you've got 50% of hydrogen. So the fixed costs are really high, but we've got to launch this ecosystem. We've got to give people this desire to move over to hydrogen, and that's one of the potential pathways that we'll speak about. So cost sharing and volumes. Nicolas Valayer, you are head of business development at Genvia. We were speaking about electricity, so Genvia has developed a technology of the electrolyzer. You're based in Béziers, and this electrolyzer, high-temperature electrolyzer technology. Can you hear us? Now I can. Can you explain very quickly why you're developing this technology? What's the objective? To lower costs as well? Or increase yield? As we were saying, about the ratio of 60% of the cost of hydrogen is from the electricity cost, 40% from the infrastructure, electrolyzer costs, and the setup. The technology Genvia made is this high-temperature electrolyzer. We're trying to play on the consumption of electricity. So each point earned it makes a big difference. in terms of the cost of the hydrogen that's produced. And what's interesting with the high temperature electrolyzer, even if the entrance kilowatt per electricity, we produce quite a bit more. We produce 40% more when we change the electrolyzer. Just that. It's not that simple, but it really is the promise of this technology. There's a gap that needs to be bridged because it's a new technology. It's alkaline. Some of us are following it closely, but the biggest projects today are using this technology. The SOC technology is a little bit lower, and it's following up because we're promised to improve performance. And then we've got a technology that works in high temperature. So the system is rather complex, but on other aspects, it's interesting, and we can come back to that. So we'll come back to that in the second part of this conference to speak with more technical elements. We spoke about infrastructure. We're going to welcome France Vincendon, who's head of hydrogen and renewable gas development at Natron, previously known as GRT Gas, who's on the network side. From a logistical point of view, broad point of view, what is the obstacle? We saw that there's a lack of experience in the market. The market isn't mature yet. But in terms of infrastructure, where are we? Hello, everyone. What's the obstacle by everything that's been set up to now? I don't know if you can hear me. I'm struggling to hear you correctly. I don't know if that's just for me. So as we said, the costs are rather high in terms of electricity, and that depends on the use. I'm really sorry. I'm really struggling to hear. Maybe I can change my headset. Mathilde, can you bring another one, please? I'm sorry, Frank. Well, while we're changing the headset, is that better? Yes, it seems like it is. So, for infrastructure, simply to say, users have a large choice. Either they're going to produce in their garden or use hydrogen that's going to come from elsewhere. And our focus is to create infrastructure that will allow them to consume with more flexibility from different sources. So to answer your question, what might limit us is the difficulty we have beyond what my colleague said. How do I ensure a continuity of supply to ensure that the costs will be competitive? The infrastructure networks, as they exist, are solutions for this type of issue. But there's a logistical issue today in hydrogen sectors. And you have a project at Natron, which is called IFIN. What is this project? 800 kilometers throughout France. This project is a European approach, which is to circulate hydrogen with a high volume of energy, which is very important for the future for energy transition in Europe, and to have the hydrogen go from its more favorable production areas to the consumption areas. So these highways that are being created, IFIN is one of them, and we're suggesting that we link together and we connect these large producers to the large consumers from the Iberian Peninsula to the north of Europe. So this project is a European project, and it's the French part of this project. And as you said, 850 kilometers. And these studies have begun. We're preparing our meeting for the legal aspects. But for 2026, this needs to be done, but we're going to be very busy trying to explain this project.
Merci beaucoup. On y
Thank you.
reviendra
Thank you
dans
so
quelques
much.
minutes
We'll
après
come
ça.
back to this in a little bit.
J'en profite, je
I want to
regarde
take
en même temps
advantage because I'm looking at the questions appear on Slido, the application. So if you have questions, don't
Il y
hesitate.
a, on dit 40% de coûts
You
fixes.
see that there's
et
40% of fixed costs and
d'électricité.
60% of electricity. Is water free?
Est-elle dans les coûts fixes?
Is that a part of fixed costs? I don't know. Who wants to answer that?
Les coûts fixes, ce sont
We
des
talk about
coûts
fixed
qui
costs.
sont-
These are costs.
Oui, c'est vrai que
It's
l'eau,
true that water
c'est un coût variable.
is a variable cost.
J'ai plutôt mis du côté des 40%.
I included it in the 40% of what I said, but it should be a part of the 60%. But the cost of water as compared to electricity is very, very, very much lower. So water isn't the most important in terms of costs. Water has issues. Water is an issue when it comes to availability for local populations. So these are subjects that we're really looking at by trying to find reuse water to produce hydrogen rather than using drinkable water that, for example, you have at home. Nicolas, yeah, it's important to add that in the 40-60%, depending on your geography, the cost of electricity, the cost of equipment, it can be 80-20 as well. It really depends. It varies. Every production area, every factory, if the electricity cost in a particular region is very low and the cost of electrolyzer technology is not economical, then the variable cost will change. In the European context where electricity is expensive, if we use low-cost alkaline technology, then the variable part will be much higher. So that's important to note. So it depends on where you are. So I'm going to continue along because we're moving along to part 2 with some of the technological levers. You developed a technology for electrolyzers, high-temperature electrolyzers. Can you explain in more detail? And the increase in yield, 40% increase. Can you give us some more details of this solution? How much could the cost possibly lower using these new technologies? So as concerns the high-temperature electrolyzer, we electrolyze steam. So it's not liquid water like alkaline technologies. We use steam. And thermodynamics, high-temperature thermodynamics, need less energy. And a part of the heat generated by electrochemistry creates two reactions. I don't want to be too technical because without having a slide or something to show you, it's hard to explain. But physics, when we have a high-temperature electrolyzer, we gain energy, or we save energy. It's added to that if we have access to heat to produce this steam, because going from liquidized water to steam requires a lot of energy. If you boil water at home, it takes a lot of time. So this phase eats up a lot of energy. So if we have a heat, for example, when we make e-fuel, Fischer-Tropsch, or other sorts of technologies, or we get heat from cement factories, steel factories, or nuclear sources, or geothermal sources, this cost is much more economical than electricity, and therefore you will have additional yield. So this is more of the electric efficiency in terms of electric yield. In terms of high-temperature technology, what's different for us from low temperature have a healthy performance at the beginning and the end of the life cycle. And then it degrades in between. By how much? On 5 years, 10%? It depends on the technology. We've also not got a lot of feedback on this. We don't, on some of the bigger projects, follow-upping on these renewable energies and understanding the impact. We're learning a lot currently. So the technology, we work on a gradation of temperatures, and we're focused on the initial temperature by increasing it to different temperatures. So the life cycle of these components is the same at the end of the life cycle. So the two combined factors
pour le même kilowatt électrique,
For the same electric kilowatt, we produce 40% more hydrogen,
kilogramme d'hydrogène,
or we produce the same kilogram with 30% less electricity. And return on investment,
ça va dépendre des configurations de
again, it depends on the project. If the geography
l'électricité est vraiment à très bas coût, on sera
has really cheap electricity, it will be variable. But if the cost of electricity is expensive, but then we need pertinent technology. What's different to each other too is when we're at high temperature, the technology will work better, in a constant level. We don't have to. When it's sunny outside, we stop it for 18 hours and we start it up the next day. We're able to continue working and heat the system even if we stop it. But it's not economical. But the focus of these factories and these electrolyzers are huge capex investment. They've got to just keep running as long as possible. So the projects that are 100% renewable, where there's a lot of variation, the economical sides are more difficult to manage. In your project, it's an alkaline electrolyzer. Can you explain that to us? What is the impact on the economy of your project in terms of technology of electrolyzers?
Alors, oui, notre électrolyseur,
Our electrolyzer
comment on a choisi notre
and how we chose it,
c'est très simple. Encore
it's
une
very
fois,
simple.
on est foufou, on fait des trucs
We're kind of crazy,
un peu pionniers.
We're
On
pioneers.
peut pas prendre tous les risques.
but we can't take all the risks. So we chose the most mature technology that exists today, which is alkaline. Alkaline is low pressure because we're at the site in terms of the dangers. We can't expose our neighbors, so everything's very well calculated within the authorizations of your local authority, and you have to choose the right technology depending on your location. So it's the most approved and the most well-known technology. And just as in all new industry sector, it's a bit older, it's more well known, so we can hope that the technologies, upcoming technologies, will improve yield, of course. So we went in this direction because we've got to start somewhere. It's our choice to have a slightly lower yield. We don't have the possibility on site to use something like the Genvia technology because we don't have this free heat source, let's say. And so we work with the advantages and inconveniences of our site to have the highest performing project as possible. We understand that in reality. Just to jump off what Gerrit said, you've got to be aware of the fact that in the hydrogen field today sector, we're not able to industrialize a project. Every project has their own specificities, their constraints, and everything is done for that particular project. We say Gerrit chose alkaline in his project. I have projects where I've got such a small amount of land, I have to choose a smaller technology because I have less space. And so this technology isn't really well known, it's more expensive, but we don't have any other choice. So it's complicated yes, it's important to lower costs, and that's our objective, but it's important to keep in mind that every project is adapted to the area, to the land, expectations of the client, the usage, if it's industry, if it's mobility, it only is operating 4 hours a day. In an industry, it's functioning 24/7. So it's important to have, we can't have a global general answer for everything. So we understand that this is unique to each site. I have a territorial question. Green hydrogen, inexpensive, will it come from countries that have inexpensive electricity and the amount of land available? For example, Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Mauritania. And we've got electrolyzers that are very cheap in China, in India. In terms of geopolitics, what are we doing? Do you have an opinion on this? I can answer a bit of this. I'll allow my friend to answer the technical questions. Yes, of course. Hydrogen will be produced more cheaply in countries where electricity is renewable and less expensive. So we're talking about renewables. Otherwise, we're talking about a grid system, and we won't go anywhere with that. So South America countries, Brazil, for example, will be able to produce this hydrogen for a very low cost. However, it has to be transported, and then it becomes more complicated, because when you truck, the typical trucks you see right around the highway, 44 tons, those trucks that have 12 meters long, you can only put 1 ton of hydrogen, just to give you an idea. Compressed to 380 bars. So we'll be able to increase that soon up to 700 bars, but we'll have 2 tons in 1 truck. So if we're saying we're producing hydrogen in Brazil, we're going to need to have a very big boat to bring it back here. Well, what about in Spain? Well, in Spain, they have sun, that's great, but they don't have the same luck we have, the opportunity, because our electricity grid is much more robust, with a production of electricity that's from the nuclear side that allows us to have an electric grid and a electricity supply that's much more quality, which isn't the case of our Spanish neighbors. Then we can also transform this hydrogen. If I'm going to go back to Brazil, if you don't mind, but if I need to transform it, I have to transform it to ammonia, methanol, stuff like that. And beyond that transformation, there's a cost. We have the boats. For example, I'll take the example of ammonia. We put it on this boat, it gets to Europe, and now it needs to be cracked. And we need to now recreate hydrogen. So these technologies exist, but the cost is very expensive and they're limited. So is the cost of hydrogen coming from Brazil, would it be less expensive than hydrogen produced in France in the right conditions? I think there's a balance, to be honest. I think it's probably same, or maybe slightly less expensive. But we will lose our sovereignty.
Thank you for this answer. I would just add an analogy with oil. Today, producing oil in the North Sea costs about 10 times the more as in Saudi Arabia. But there is a market for everything. So there are aspects of geopolitical sovereignty, but transport costs have an impact. And there is a market for different hydrogens produced in different places. Thank you. Frank? That's exactly it. It all depends on usage. The hydrogen market will be pulled by industry. Industry needs large volumes, and we will have to significantly grow production. So I think that there is room for local production, but there's also an advantage to looking around us to see what's happening. And the infrastructures that we intend to build participate in the fact that at one point, for a given usage, you need to find different sources of hydrogen, just like energy consumers do. They diversify their supply sources. And I think that the same thing will happen for the hydrogen market at the industrial level. Industrialists are demanding. They know it will be expensive, and they've understood that. And for it to be the cost as low as possible, they have to have different possibilities to optimize things. And the open infrastructures that we propose are a means to drop the cost. So for producers, we have an enlarged distribution area, and for consumers also, and therefore they benefit from a market price, which is a tremendous advantage. So a market actually are the people that use the product at the end. If we don't have the end users, there's no point in producing. You did a study in Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, where there's quite a lot of industry and consumers, to see the interaction between transport infrastructures and the storage of hydrogen. So what came out of this study? We did this study, and I wanted to say beforehand with regard to our discussion, there are some systems that we can imagine to transport hydrogen. We talked about trucks, we talked about boats. I come from Marseille-Fos, and in this site we did a study on the hydrogen market. And one of the conclusions of the studies we did on hydrogen is that for the industrial area in Fos and up the Rhone, there were particularly economic means of transport. So depending on the usage, the barges were the least expensive. So we found this optimal economic means of transport. And with regard to the study you mentioned, there is another study carried out in the Lyon region, which puts the spotlight on the advantage of a gas grid. So, like hydrogen, it works over a longer time span than electricity, and that's an advantage because the balance that we will be able to find with a hydrogen grid will be on far longer time spans than on the electric grid, where your balance is within the second, and if you're not good, there's a blackout. For the gas grid, it's not the same thing. For the hydrogen, we have this time buffer that provides us with flexibility and with storage. And beyond this grid will connect to saline cavity storage, and this is what we showed in our study in Auvergne-Rhône. And there's an economic gain that is €1 a kilo that we can gain thanks to this optimization. That's very interesting. So with RT and Store Energy and Nitron and all of the associated partners, we demonstrated that there was a capacity to find savings in infrastructures. €1 less thanks to storage. Christelle, all of these infrastructures affect your project. To multiply the number of consumers? Well, today, the creation of these infrastructures, be they hydrogen or CO2 for fuel, because we're talking about hydrogen, but if we want biofuels, we must also transport CO2. So, but the opportunity for hydrogen is when we develop a hydrogen project in the industrial world, we're developing a project for a client because they have a need, and this is where we start to initiate things. And the fact of having grids in the future will allow us to find new clients and to increase the power of our projects and to work on scale economies. So this is a real opportunity within a territory. And I also wanted to talk about CO2 because we're talking about fuel, and this is the subject. Today, to produce e-fuel, we need a hydrogen resource that we will manufacture and produce with our electrolyzers. But we also need a source of biogenic CO2 that we find in cement works, paper manufacturers, etc. And very often the hydrogen production sites where there will be the future refineries and where we collect the CO2 is not in the same place. And this is a real challenge to develop these CO2 grids like Natron and Terriga do throughout the territory, because thanks to this, we will be able to transport CO2 to the site where we produce the hydrogen to produce e-fuel. So beyond the tariff optimization for certain projects, there are also the challenges that must be met for our projects to exist. A CO2 grid. Yes, just to add to this, these grids also are interesting because they're open grids. What does that mean? Well, an open grid means that the rules of the game, I feed in, I take out, I know what the cost will be, so the rules of the game are the same, and that's not always the case. There are certain types of grids that don't work according to this system. They're a bit of a black box, and we don't know how things will evolve over time. What are the rules? When I double my production, what happens? We don't have that view. But open infrastructure grids that we promote are very clear, and I wanted to clarify that. Very good, so open grids, CO2 grids to go with the hydrogen. In terms of sites, there is a question. With hydrogen transport infrastructure, is it 100% H2 or is it mixed with natural gas? And what about the quality of the pipelines if you're transporting pure H2? Yes, it's 100% H2. Today, with the markets as they stand, in terms of industry and mobility, it will be 100% H2, no doubt on that. There might be traces of hydrogen in the gas grids, but it will be very marginal. But for hydrogen margins, it will be 100% dedicated and no natural gas in there at all. In terms of sites, for the construction of big wind or sun farms, should we impose the production of green hydrogen and storage on the site? That's a very good idea, but it doesn't work. Why wouldn't it work? Well, because electrolyzers suffer greatly from intermittence if we don't use them continuously. We've studied this, it doesn't work. I like the idea of storing hydrogen. I explained earlier on that we could put 1 ton of hydrogen in a 12-meter long truck. Hydrogen can't be stored in gaseous form. The only way that we can do this is in a saline cavity. But, we don't always have a saline cavity at hand on our wind turbine projects. So we won't put... So a different storage from saline cavities require complicated authorizations because there's a danger of explosion. Therefore, if you wish to combine PV plus hydrogen, the advantage dwindles and economically it just doesn't work. So technically it doesn't work, economically it doesn't work because there must be a truck that must come and collect the hydrogen and then deliver it elsewhere. So it's a nice idea, but it just doesn't work. But I'll carry on with a few questions on the slider. Yes, we're talking about the future. What if we did this? What if we stored the hydrogen? What if we transported it? But what we need to do today is really bring these projects to life, produce the hydrogen, and then we'll come on to this afterwards. But we're in a stage where we're not yet mature. And of course, we have to have projects for the future. But today, let us work on producing hydrogen, creating the first bubbles, find the industries to use it, sell it, build up our know-how, and create more projects. So, yes, we were talking about levers to bring the price down. But the first thing we must have is to have visibility on our regulations. It might seem a bit silly, but when we have visibility, it allows us to invest. If we can invest, we will learn. If we learn, we improve. So we need to have rules that do not change every month. Well, that was the third part. How do we structure this new sector? So you said rules of the game, political visibility, long-term visibility. Yes, because we are in industry. So when we develop a project, for example, a mobility project, yes, like we see in Béziers-en-Narbonne, and that there is national hydrogen authorities that, a few years down the line say, well, we'll only have electric vehicles, we won't have hydrogen vehicles anymore. Well, it changes everything. But so we need stabilities because as producers, as industrialists who will invest in the long term for hydrogen, and also for the people who use the hydrogen. If we don't convey a clear message and say you can convert to hydrogen and you will still find this hydrogen in 15 years' time, these people will not convert. If we don't convert, we have no users. And the second lever are volumes. If the volume doesn't develop and do not allow us to get a payback on the fixed cost. So stability will allow us to increase volumes and bring the price down. Very clear. I hope that the politicians will hear. Same question to all four of you. What do you need to develop the sector? Well, these are the papers. When I prepared the roundtable at the end, I said, what about the future? So we're, aligned. But I think stability is the must. And we can see that today we are creating an entire sector. There are industrialists, producers, transporters, users, and we must support the entire sector. As industrialists, we must be supported so that we know where we're going over the next 15 years. We must reassure users and maybe support them financially with long-term contracts. So, for example, in the field of e-fuel, we work with aircraft manufacturers, and what they say is, I don't want to commit to 20 years with you for your e-fuel, because in 10 years' time, maybe the e-fuel will cost less. So I'm not going to commit to 20 years, but take care as an example. The project we're developing in Nantes, it represents an investment of 1 billion euros. So, of course, you can imagine that we must be able to have a bit of visibility as to, how much we will be able to sell. So we must support the future users in order to create a stable environment. So why not with subsidies or contract for difference support? We need to stabilize things and support the entire chain, producers and French and European producers. How can they fight against Chinese electrolyzer manufacturers? So we need to work on this energy sovereignty as developers, producers, industrials, and users. So we need to support the entire sector. Nicolas, we were talking about Chinese or Indian electrolyzers, which are very cheap. How can we counter this risk of massive imports of foreign electrolyzers? Well, as we saw, there was a need to fund these projects. So the subsidies or subsidies from French taxpayers should be directed towards French technology. We had this experience in the solar industry in past years, and we helped the PV industry to develop in China. So we have the opportunity of not reproducing this experience and to favor European technology. Does it require a label? No, we're going in the right direction. The Hydrogen Bank is launching an auction, and then they're favouring electrolyzers whose components are made in Europe. So yes, there are things now in the calls of tender that are going in this direction. But we can go further than that. So it's essential. If there's public funding, it's normal that we should favour French or European industry technology and jobs. So sometimes we talk about alkaline technology, we talk about Western alkaline and AGL alkaline. So we need to compare apples with apples. Is it exactly the same technology? Are the performances the same? We need to look at all of this. But for a developer, if they look at some specs and they're practically equivalent and the cost is 3 times less, then it's normal that they raise the question about this. So you need a French or European label with. What else do you need? Yes, there is. If there's public funding, the fact to prefer European or French manufacturers seems natural. But so when you have a factory that is entirely automated and that doesn't have any human workers, because the cost of human workers in Europe is far higher than in Asia, then we can be very competitive, because the cost of the electrolyzer in a project, we didn't talk about this, but 60% more electricity. And the rest is not the cost of the electrolyzer, it is the investments in the factory. And the cost of the electrolyzer itself is just one quarter, because there is civil engineering, the buildings, the compressors, the purification. The electrolyzer is just it's a significant part, but it's not the main part of the cost of the project. So as a developer, we need support to scale up. When we scale up, we know we will be competitive. What is scaling up? What power? Well, scaling up means in the future, we want to supply big projects of several hundreds of megawatts. But we need to start with small steps, and that's what we're doing. And we will scale up the size. First 1 megawatt, a few dozen megawatts, so that we can replicate things. So we need support to scale up the technology, and then we need orders. We can't invest in large automated factories if we're not sure that there will be orders. Does this mean that there will be call for tenders? Well, I would like one thing. If we don't want to use Chinese products, we have to do better. But to do better, we have to give the opportunity to people such as Gemiel to support them until they can market a product that is technologically better. So, and Geneviève needs support to reach that point, and they will be better then. I think it's important to say that. We have the capacity of producing some very high-tech products. They will be better than what the Chinese are doing at a given point. The Chinese will catch up quickly, so we need to keep going. But once we've launched this virtuous circle of people that we've supported until the industrial level, we can count on them to continue to evolve and to create a product that is preferable to the Chinese product. I think we've understood this virtuous circle. We need to trigger things, scale up, provide visibility. Let's look at the questions. I'm afraid I didn't note them down as we went along, but let's have a look. You can also raise your hand if you didn't want to use the app. There's Adam with a microphone. Who can bring a microphone? Or Helen. In the questions, for iPhone. iPhone seems to cross France to serve Germany. Is that the case? iPhone, yes, is mainly an infrastructure that will allow major transport, but it's an opportunity. We can see this in the areas that it crosses around Marseille, Lyon, the cities of the East also. On this industrial market, that will be the precursor of the hydrogen economy. There are opportunities that will arise because the large hydrogen users will have the choice of comparing a certain number of solutions that they will have available to them. And the fact that this infrastructure goes near to their sites is an opportunity. And why towards Germany? Well, because Germany, as you know, are having trouble designing their energy policy. They've stopped nuclear power, they've stopped coal, but they have a lot of needs because it's one of the first industrial economies of the world and they need energy to produce. So they have to do something about it. And they've decided to go for hydrogen, and in larger quantities than we use in France or other countries. So we're lucky to have nuclear energy, a far more diverse mix. And this is one of the main reasons. But, you know, I'd really like to underline that there is an entire network in the 5 regions that the project goes through. There are a multitude of industrial projects that will encourage territorial projects, projects around mobility and other types of projects. This is how we create the economy. Derek, yes, we mustn't forget that it's the first grid. It doesn't mean that we won't take things further. And I find the choice of this first grid very clever, because we had to define a route that brought together as many consumers as possible. It is that one. Because we have Germany, we have all of the French industrial zones of the east that are on the track, and Fos. It doesn't mean that there won't be more in the future, but once again, we need volume to pay for the infrastructure. And this is the best compromise to have a maximum amount of volume. Yes, without forgetting the southwest part, where there's a lot of capacity. As we said, it links the storage capacity as well. And in this debate, we need to, you know, overcome the obstacles to bring prices down. So we hear industrial consumers making the same demands as you. Basically, it's to have visibility over future regulations, which will allow them to invest with no regrets. And so I think that we all agree that, you know, in order to break this vicious circle of the hen and the egg, we need Europe in order to really get the economy off the ground. That could have been the conclusion, but I will take 2 or 3 questions. Can you use CO2 from methanization rather than CO2 from industry? Is it the same CO2? Yes. That was quick. What are the risks related to hydrogen? How can we guarantee safety on an industrial site? Well, that's a very large question that we might talk about next year. No, just in a nutshell, today we use hydrogen in industrial systems. We produce 5 million tons of hydrogen on one site. It's not a problem. No, we use 115 million tons of grey hydrogen today. So the safety rules are controlled, be it grey hydrogen or renewable hydrogen. It's the same thing. So there is no particular problem on industrial sites. Question from Jean-Pierre. Mobility is one of the growing sectors that uses hydrogen. Why not, to begin with, encourage grey hydrogen for this usage, which would develop the market of hydrogen mobility faster? And then we can move on to green hydrogen. Well, we've seen that politically, hydrogen for mobility. I don't know what you think about it, but I think it's better to continue with oil. No, to avoid decarbonation, it means, you know, I understand the question, which is why do you want to be whiter than white from day one? We need to proceed in stages in order to achieve the very best. But grey hydrogen, well, we would need to produce more because the grey hydrogen that is produced today is used. That would mean we would develop production capacity for grey hydrogen, whereas we're not going to decarbonate mobility, so you might as well just, you know, use diesel. Are there any questions from the floor with the microphone?
Sur les coûts de production, sur les leviers.
On production costs, on the levers. No particular questions? Well, in any case, I think that we have, because we needed visibility.
Un appel de pied aux politiques, en tout cas, pour arriver.
Well, we're reaching out to politicians, demanding stable policies around hydrogen. And we've seen that technologically speaking, there's a lot of progress to be done also. But thank you very much. Yes, but there are projects, there are grids, things are getting off the road. We just need to politically pick up the pace. Thank you very much. A round of applause.
Et merci à Mathilde pour la technique, merci à Anita pour la traduction et merci à Hélène pour le micro. Bon après-midi à tous.